Another 424 pandemic edition. This one's more of an interview format with Justin Reeves, who is one of our longtime friend of the classroom of 424. He's got a bachelor's and a master's in civil engineering from Texas A&M and has worked at LAN, I guess, for the last 20 years, 15 years. I don't know how long you've been there, Justin. Justin's going to tell us a little bit about himself and what he does.
So as Pete said, I've been with LAN for, I guess, 17 years now. So I started in 2003, technically interned in 2002. I've worked in their Houston, College Station, and now Fort Worth offices doing, today I lead our infrastructure group, our municipal infrastructure group in North Texas, with a team of about 25 people across 4 offices. Our forte is large diameter pipe design in and around the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex. So I am a fighting Texas Aggie class of 2003. For my bachelor's degree, I got my master's in 2004, and I've been with LAN ever since. I've been coming back to this class now. Man, Pete, when did it start?
All of '09.
'09. So I think I've been there almost every semester. I know of 2 that I got a rain out on one and a cancellation on one, but it's a joy to come back every year.
So, Justin, tell me, in the past, you've told us what your academic expertise is and then what you've actually done with LAN. So why don't you tell us about stuff that you were prepared to do and things that you actually wound up doing?
Yeah, I was prepared. I was really well prepared to use textbooks and calculators and do a lot of calculations. That's what I was really well prepared for at A&M. What I quickly found out is that life is different in practice. So I've had a number of different positions at LAN. I've been with our large diameter pipeline group. I've been with our wastewater treatment group. I did a short stint with our transit group doing Houston Metro. I did about 5 years with our facilities group, and now I'm back doing large diameter pipe design. So my career's kind of, and as you can see now, I'm a professional organizer based on my background. So I go through that list to say that I've bounced around quite a bit, learning new things, doing new things along the way, none of which were academically taught in school. It's just a lot of stuff that built the foundation that then I was able to grow it into what we do now.
And how often does that happen in your job, that you do something that you just weren't necessarily prepared for academically, but you still got to do?
Yeah, I would say more often than not. I mean, statistically, I think the numbers are about 80% of people end up doing something that's not closely related to their career or to their degree. And that number might be a little bit high, but it's somewhere in there. So the really technical fields in civil engineering generally do follow their academics pretty closely. So geotechnical engineering, structural engineering, what you learn in school is more quickly directly applied in practice. A lot of the other fields, environmental, hydrology, hydraulics, you learn the theory in school, which is certainly critical, but the application is vastly different because we're driven by the political winds, we're driven by capital financing and how those budgets and schedules align, and how they control projects and how property owners control projects. So in engineering, I've certainly found most people end up taking the theory that they learned in school and applying it in ways that we weren't prepared for, which is, again, why lifelong learning is so important.
And sort of following up on that, you said applying that information in ways you hadn't expected. It's kind of difficult to teach, but I guess one of the things that students need to be ready for is applying theory to a particular political situation as opposed to a physical situation. How important is it in your life to stay current with things like, I don't know, local politics, national politics? How often do those things, in other words, things you didn't study in school necessarily, how often do those things affect your job?
Daily. Now, we don't keep up with it daily, but they certainly affect our job daily. So again, I lead our municipal infrastructure group in North Texas. So we're doing work for cities, counties, and large water districts. And it's interesting to see how each of those is differently affected by politics, right? So water districts are one step removed from the voter, right? So water districts are governed by appointees. Those appointees are named by elected officials. So politics very rarely plays in their decisions because they're not directly responsible to a voting body. Alternatively, municipalities who are directly responsible to the voter, it's once a month that we get a call that from a client that says, we need you to stop what you're doing and work on this because city council member A got a phone call and he needs it done tomorrow, right? So those technical decisions can be put aside just because the political winds blow a different direction. And counties, it's even different because counties, so cities in Texas are generally governed by a council, so you've got a body of people. Counties really roll up to a county judge who's got probably the most political power in any single body. And with current events, you see that today, right? A lot of the shelter-in-place orders came first through a county judge, and then the mayors followed suit. So in school, you don't learn any of that. You don't. So when I showed up at LAN, I was ready to go with my textbooks and my calculators, ready to apply formulas and solve, loading problems and how big does your pipe need to be and situations like that. As a pipeline engineer, 90% of my job is social, right? So the pipe diameter is extremely easy to calculate. Designing that pipe structurally is overall extremely easy to do, but we spend 80 to 90% of our time figuring out, okay, where does this pipe go, right? Where does it go in the street, in somebody's backyard, in somebody's front yard, across someone's farm? And those are all social and political issues that you don't learn on our side of the campus, right? You got to go to a whole nother quadrant of A&M to learn how to deal with that. So, and again, that's where the lifelong learning comes in, is because the success in my career, in my field of study or field of practice, is not who can design the best pipe. It's who can navigate these social and political waters well to execute the project and minimize surprises for the client. Learn skills.
That is a fascinating thing to say. You said that it's not someone who can design the perfect design. It's someone who can, as you said, navigate the political waters to get it done.
Yeah.
And you're right. We don't teach that. I'm not sure how you would teach that.
We teach that.
Well, we teach audience analysis and clear writing and ideally decision making, but I'm not sure if we actually, because it can get weird, like Justin said.
You just piqued my interest significantly. So I didn't know that you guys teach audience analysis. That's one of the biggest challenges that I have with, I was going to say new hires, but frankly, it's engineers, is understanding that it doesn't matter how you communicate, it matters how they communicate, right? So understanding how someone else is going to receive and take that information is extremely important. And we as engineers too often assume that everybody's an engineer. And if I tell them you have an 80% chance of living or an 80% chance of dying or whatever, that they're going to take that information analytically, right? But we got to understand that some people need you to come, put your hand on their back, whisper in their ear that life is going to be okay, and share that news in a different way. Well, you laugh. I have one of my largest clients in North Texas. We joke all the time. We say, my boss just asked me who's going to be the right project manager for this job, and I told him, I said, it's whoever can snuggle up to them once a week, whisper in their ear that everything's going to be okay, and buy them ice cream. Like, it doesn't matter technically how smart they are. They've got to be able to communicate with this person in a soft way, because that's how this client hears it.
Yeah. So how do they get to that? How do they prepare for that? What can they do?
So I think it's the same as just speaking in public, right? So usually when I come to their class, 9 times out of 10, somebody comes up afterwards and says, Also there. Okay. Yeah. So,
Okay.
yes, Jessica, you asked how do you get to it? How do you do it? You just do it. You've just got to go and do it and interact with enough people enough different times. And frankly, one of the things that's always in my presentation is you almost have to embrace failure, right? You're going to mess up. And if anybody's been in a relationship, boyfriend, girlfriend, married, fiance, whatever, you know that eventually you're going to screw up and you're going to say something that really upsets your significant other. And then you learn not to talk that way anymore, right? It's the same with my clients. I've done that before where I share information and it doesn't come across well. I've got to find a new way to package it, a new way to present it.
Well, so how would you define lifelong? I mean, we've talked about a lot of adjustments you've had to make on the job, right? And essentially, so far, the main theme has been the difference between academic learning in the classroom and then applying that stuff in the workplace. So, given that, how would you define lifelong learning?
Uh, Man, a question that deserves a very simple answer that I don't have, right? So the best thing I can say is lifelong learning is embracing change, um, and aggressively pursuing knowledge, right? So what I see too often is, people come out of school or people get in their career or people get really good at something and they just hold on to it forever. But we have to acknowledge and understand that our careers are constantly changing, right? So the technology alone that has changed in our profession or even in our lifetimes, it's phenomenal to think that, I mean, the desktop calculator came out in the early 1970s, right? So people that are retiring now started their career without a calculator on their desk. And that blows our mind, right? You think about the computers that, the three of us went to school with. Our cell phones have 10 times the computing capacity, right? We've sent men to the moon with slide rules. So, and again, that was 40 years ago. That's the average. The average career is going to be 40 to 45 years. So you've got to constantly be embracing that change and understand that, you might not want to be on the cutting edge, right? But you want to be right behind it because the success, the people that are succeeding, the companies that are succeeding are the ones that can understand and see those trends in the market or see those trends in the industry, and apply them in new ways, new and creative ways to their business. So again, aggressively pursuing knowledge and embracing change.
Okay, so let's. How can a young civil engineer go about aggressively pursuing knowledge? What does and it's one of my least favorite contemporary questions. What does that look like? Because it's such a heavily metaphorical question that I'm not sure everybody understands what it means. But tell us, Justin, what does it look like to aggressively pursue knowledge?
Okay, so in our practice, there's very practical things to do. One, you've got to do it on your own. Your company's not going to do it for you, right? So companies are really good, businesses are really good at making learning opportunities available. But the successful people in my profession, in our profession, are the ones that see those opportunities and pursue them on their own, right? So if anyone had an internship this summer, I'm sure they saw a brown bag come in, a brown bag lunch or a lunch and learn. Those are where vendors or technical specialists will come into your office and teach you about something. I've sat through 100 brown bag seminars that I went into thinking I have no interest in, but I just want to add to my toolkit, right? So I learned about screening walls. I learned about manhole covers. I learned about grade rings. And over time, you start to add these things to your toolbox and you can draw them out when you need, right? So that's a really practical thing. And what it looks like is simply taking advantage of the opportunities you see. Some other ways to do it that we see most often are conferences. So conference attendance, attending those seminars, those presentations are important. And then reading. Honestly, the biggest one you got is reading. Read, and read some more. I read the other day, actually, the average CEO in America reads one book a week. Now that floored me. I read about one book every other week usually, um, but it just tells you there's so much to be gained from simply reading, and it doesn't always have to be some technical journal. So Pete, you've asked me before when I talk about reading, what do you read, right? I read, obviously, I check up on the news, local news and national news to stay up to date. I read a few trade journals that I found particularly applicable to my career, either about pipelines or underground construction. And then, quite honestly, I read a mixture of books throughout the year, everything from juvenile fiction, reading to my kids, to presidential biographies. But as you take all that in, you're just adding to the database.
So real quick, so I have a sneaky suspicion that watching a conversation between colleagues and professionals is one of the things that your average college student needs to see, because we actually so when Justin and Jessica, you all know that when we talk, we oftentimes talk about really important stuff, and we talk about what we're reading and what we're learning. So real quick, I'm going to go through and I'm going to say yes, I'm always reading at least one nonfiction book. Right now, I'm reading a book on. Okay, I realized at the beginning of the sentence how it was going to end. I'm reading a book on symbolic logic because it's awesome. Okay, it is. That symbolic logic has been one of my interests for about 20 years now. I don't talk to anybody about it. I don't do it in public. Okay, I'm just saying it is an interesting field. So I'm reading that, and then I always have at least one or two fantasy novels that are science fiction. Right now, I'm reading a zombie novel that I'm reading it for the second time, and the reason that I'm reading it is because most of the setting takes place in a society that's been dealing with a pandemic for 20 years. And so houses are now designed with decontamination chambers, and cars are designed not to open their doors until someone has given a clear blood test. And in other words, there's all these machinations in place to deal with a pandemic. And that's why I've been reading it, because it sort of makes me think about the things that we're doing now, the government response. Are we doing the right things? Are we thinking things through as clearly as we can? But I also read a tremendous amount of news, probably way too much. Right now, maybe 4 or 5 hours a day, usually 2 or 3 hours a day. Jessica, what kind of stuff do you read?
A lot of news right now as well. I used to just mostly follow national news, but I started following KBTX local news, like probably around the start of the pandemic, which I've found to be pretty helpful. Actually, very helpful, much more helpful than the national news. Uh, Aside from that, I just started it, but a friend of mine actually just published a book, and I'm starting to read that. It's an adventure journey, and like the brain is a map, and it's about epilepsy and like the sibling patient relationship among kids. And supposedly it's this, adventure novel is always made up words based on epilepsy. But just came out like 3-4 days ago. So
it seems as though we all read a pretty wide variety of stuff. And I know also, well, this is a regular topic of conversation between me and Justin. What are you reading right now? And of course, Jessica and I are always talking about reading and writing. So we've talked about sort of what you do and how you've applied classroom knowledge to a shifting workplace scenario, Justin, and what is lifelong learning, and then how do you go about it? We talked about reading a great deal. We talked about those brown bag lunches. Why is lifelong learning important in particular to civil engineers?
No, that's an easy one because you never know what's around the corner, right? I mean, it's never been as clear as like today, this week. I mean, I've been working in my office, my closet for the past week and a half. We have LAN's 350 people. Every single one of them is working from home right now. And we've all learned how to use new tools We've learned how to do the same thing that we were doing in the office, but do it more efficiently or use different tools to accomplish the same things. But literally 2 weeks ago, like we were joking about China and Italy, thinking, well, that'll never happen to us. And here we are 2 weeks later, our entire business has been interrupted, right? And we've all had to pick up and learn new things. And it's been eye-opening, right? It's been interesting to say the least, but it's been a perfect example of why you need to be embracing that change, because LAN, luckily, our IT leader is a stereotypical lifelong learner, always on the cutting edge, always looking for what's next, always trying to think about tomorrow's problems and how we can prepare for them today. So LAN's transition to work from home almost seamless. So much so we've had several clients comment on, I haven't seen a hiccup in anything you guys are doing, unlike all the other consultants we're working with. And we were positioned for that because we had somebody leading the charge, getting ready for it. But outside of what's going on today, our industry is constantly evolving, constantly changing, and the tools we use are different. The tools we use are changing. The way we accomplish things is changing. In my business, I always talk about pipe material is a big thing. We're seeing new pipe materials that come out that have benefits and we're seeing pipe materials that were created in the 50s and 60s that are completely phasing out right now, right? And that's the span of one person's career, seeing changes like that. And it applies to transportation and structures and everything else. There's cutting edge stuff out there that will change the way our society looks.
Okay, so let's see if we can have one more question to kind of round things out a little bit. Justin, this one's a little unexpected. Let's say if you could give the engineers in our class, the future engineers in our class, any one piece of advice about lifelong learning, what would it be?
That's I think my answer to this. It's going to be read. Honestly, it's read. And I say that understanding, fully knowing that there's nothing the average college student wants to do less than read on their own right now. And I think that's okay. I read probably 2 or 3 books in college. I understand. But reading is the way but once I got out, again, I read anywhere from 25 to 50 books a year now. That's the way that most people gather their information. And it doesn't take much to become an expert, right? So, what do they say? The Chinese proverb, it's like 10,000 hours to become an expert at something, right? So the point in that, wherever it originated, the point is you become a master at something over time, right? So I can sit down and read everything about pipe design in a matter of a week, but it's not going to be retained, right? I'm much better off reading 30 minutes a day over the span of 5 years and sometimes reading the same thing 2 or 3 times. And over that span of 5 years, I can become an expert in my field. Right. So there's one paper that was written in 1973, 73 or 77, I can't remember, but it drives flexible pipe design theory. Everything is kind of summarized in this one paper. And I've read that same paper probably 6 times, right? Because I don't know it all yet. But over the span of 10 years and reading it 10 times, I'll get there. So my one piece of advice for lifelong learning is read. Just absolutely read anything you can. I think it's a Groucho Marx quote that says, outside of a dog, reading is man's best friend.
Yeah.
Inside of a dog, it's too dark to read. So,
yeah.
Little levity for your day. You didn't ask me what I'm reading right now. I was offended.
Justin, what are you reading right now?
Okay, so I always have at least 3 books going. I always have a fiction, a biography of some kind, and then a learning or self-help book of some kind. So I'm reading a juvenile fiction series called Raising Dragons to my kids right now. That's my read aloud to my kids. I'm reading a biography of Napoleon Bonaparte, which is fascinating. That dude had some major narcissism going. And I'm reading a book called iGen. It's about Generation Z, which most of the students are probably considered to be Generation Z. It's a statistical analysis of the difference between Gen X, Millennial, and Gen Z. So it's fascinating. So that's my three.
I think just like you said, if you can do it, if you're clever enough to read through a good book and identify the things that really are coming, or the things that are likely, or why that change is probable in that universe. Yeah, I think a good reader is probably going to be well prepared.
Yeah, and that's why you see CEOs reading a book a week. You got to read a lot to find the nuggets that really drive your business or drive your career. So, good plug.
That's right.